New neighbor. I'm a middle-aged man living in the Dakota White neighborhood for about 7 years. One day I saw a moving truck outside the house next door, which had been vacant for almost forever. A woman in her early 30s, presumably my new neighbor, got out of the house and instructed the people to unload the truck. She noticed me looking in her direction and gave me a smile along with a wave. I felt awkward because I've always been pretty shy with women, but despite that, I waved back. As I was about to head inside my house, I heard her asking in a thunderous voice, "What's your name, neighbor?" I looked around and sure she was talking to me before hesitantly responding, "Nathan." She complimented my name before giving me hers, which was Rosalina. I nodded my head in acknowledgement before heading inside. In the next few days, I got to know about her. She was the one who told me everything. Before moving here, she lived in a small suburban town with a strange name that I couldn't recall at the moment. She said she wanted growth, which wasn't possible living there, and that was the reason she moved. An old man was living across the street who was infamous for being a pervert. I don't know the entire detail about how he was with women, but as far as I'd seen, he was nice with other men. Despite that, I never liked him. One day, when I was returning from work, I saw him talking to Rosalina outside her yard. He had a creepy smile on his face, while the expression on Rosalina's face was pure disgust. Assuming he had said something for her to feel repulsed, I decided to step forward and told him to return to his house. She seemed relieved watching him go away and turned to me to say thanks. Even then, I wasn't comfortable with conversing with the girls, so I only gave awkward responses as usual at whatever she said. She even asked if I wanted to come over for a cup of coffee, but I declined the offer. After a brief chit-chat, I turned to head inside my home. However, I could feel her gaze piercing my back until I disappeared from her sight. The next day when I woke up, I heard a commotion outside. I peeked through my bedroom window to see what was going on when I noticed a crowd outside the old man's house. There were also police cars there, making me wonder if they had come to arrest the man for some reason. He probably did something perverted to deserve that. As my curiosity piqued, I went outside and approached his house to check. However, when I got there, what awaited me was the news that made my blood run cold. The old man was found dead in the front yard of his house. Even more terrifying was that he had suffocated to death with his right fist stuck in his throat that was cut off from his wrist. His jaw completely dislocated, something that couldn't have happened without compulsion. However, there was no traces of the culprit who had sent him to that state. It was given that whoever did it must have completely overpowered him, so the culprit was most likely a man. At least that's what everyone else believes. My thoughts on the matter were different. While I was there, my attention shifted to Rosaline, who, unlike others, had a very calm expression on her face. She didn't seem surprised or horrified by the man's death, as if she knew it beforehand. It was either that, or she had seen so many gruesome deaths that this one didn't faze her. The whole neighborhood was in shock because of this had never happened there before. Apart from the old man's perverted behaviors, Dakota White was one of the safest neighborhoods in that town, which was the main reason I went to live there all those years ago. The police focused on the investigation, but even after a month, there was no progress. They couldn't figure out who and with what motive did the culprit kill him. Though I had my suspicions about Rosalina, I couldn't bring myself to share my doubt with anyone. One weekend, while I was taking my rest at home and scrolling through my phone, I heard a knock on my door. Since I didn't have any friends or relatives who would visit me, I thought probably it was one of the neighbors, or perhaps it was the police again, who was constantly questioning the entire neighborhood for the past few days. Upon opening the door, I found Rosalina with a panicked expression, dressed in a black hoodie, trying to cover her face. She asked me if she could come inside. At first I hesitated, for she seemed suspicious and I didn't want to get involved. However, before I could say anything, she pushed her way inside and locked the door. giving me the signal to stay quiet. She whispered that I don't open the door for anyone. That was when I heard police sirens and immediately realized that my suspicions were correct. The look in her eyes was not something to ignore, and after what happened to that old man, I couldn't help but feel frightened down to the soles of my shoes. She made it known that she had no intention to harm me since she liked me, but it gave me no assurance that she would stick to her words. I don't know how, but I gathered the courage to ask her, "Why did you kill him?" After a brief pause, her lips moved. "What do you think?" She counter-questioned me, and though I had a guess, I couldn't respond. She heaved a sigh before saying he tried doing what no one else should do. Those words enough to confirm my suspicions. There were a few minutes of silence following that, only broken by the faint sound of her breathing and the pounding of my heart. "Can't you just turn yourself in? Maybe you would get a lesser sentence. Wouldn't that be better than running away forever?" I hesitantly said. She looked at me with a weird expression, and for a moment I thought I was going to die. To my relief, that didn't happen. Instead, she just exited my house. I thought she went to turn herself in upon my suggestion, but I was wrong. I never saw her after that. No one did. The police couldn't capture her either. I sometimes wonder about her thinking. Looks can be so deceiving sometimes. Who could tell that feeble girl could turn out to be such a monstrous killer?
Hey guys, thanks so much for all the support. If you haven't subscribed to the channel yet, please feel free to do so.
From 1998 to 2001, I lived in a small craftsman-style home in Laurel Mountains, not too far from Frank Lloyd Wright's Falling Water. The home had a twin next door that was built at the same time, but by the time we bought our place, the one next door had been remodeled and expanded so extensively that it was unrecognizable. The story goes that the property belonged to two brothers, and the brother whose house ended up getting a makeover had two sons. But here's the fishy part, which I personally don't buy. Our neighbor in the other house told us that the two boys were werewolves. I didn't know this part of the story until my husband told me later on, after we both had experienced some strange things, which I will elaborate in a moment. When he told my husband about this, he invited him in for a tour of his home. And during the tour, he pulled back the carpet to show my husband a stone pentagram, which was built into the slate of the foyer and the floor. Another fact that was not related to me until later. A month or so passed and we got a really sweet rescue dog, a Sheltie, and she was perfectly friendly, normal, and protective over my 7-year-old daughter. But over the following months, she started doing some strange things. I get up in the middle of the night to find her growling down the stairs at something. And during the day, as I was watching TV or something in my studio, I'm an artist, she would stand between me and the door to the dining room and growl for an inordinate amount of time. Over the months, she began to get a little unpredictable too. She would wet on the carpet, which she had never done up to that point, and eventually she would bite me. By that point, I was pregnant and scared to have a biting dog around a baby, so I took her to the ASPCA. During my pregnancy, I started sleeping in another room away from my husband as he snored like a freight train, and it was hard enough to get rest being big and pregnant. When one night, I woke to something crawling up from the foot end of the bed and over my feet and legs. I couldn't see anything now and was so terrified that I couldn't even scream. I was able to put a hand up and grab the headboard. This was an old, rickety double bed that my mother-in-law had given us for our spare room and slammed it against the wall repeatedly. With that noise, I was finally able to scream, and whatever was on my legs disappeared. I ran to the hall to find my husband running to meet me and asking me what had happened, and I didn't know what to say. That winter, a few months after the baby was born, I was sleeping in the room with the baby who was in his crib, and my mother was visiting. We'd all be enjoying an evening in front of the fireplace, and the whole house was warm and toasty. When we went to the bed late at night, probably around midnight, I woke at 2 a.m. to the baby screaming. And when I tried to get up, I was so ice cold, I could barely move. My mom and husband heard the baby screaming and came into the room to see what was wrong. Then my husband said, "Why the hell is it so cold in here?" The door was open the whole time, by the way. So my mom took the baby out of the room and my husband helped me out to the hallway beyond the open door, and the rest of the house was still toasty warm. Thank God we ended up moving out the following summer. But before we had, my husband said he'd spoken to the neighbor about our experiences, and he said, "Oh yeah, the 2 werewolf boys' father had killed them, and then himself, and the boys' ghosts roam the 2 properties."
For the longest time, me and my friend lived next door to these absolutely insane people that made our lives a complete living hell for like an entire year. They were pretty well behaved for the first few months after they moved in, but after a while, they started absolutely blasting music in the middle of the night. I'm not just talking about the gentle kind of bass thump that passively is annoying. I'm talking the kind of loud where you couldn't get a wink of sleep. The police had to be called out a few times to get them to turn it down, and even then, they confessed that they couldn't really do anything other than issue fines. And they got progressively worse though. And it turned out half the reason the music was so loud was to match the sound of the mom and dad having these legit fist fights in the middle of the night. It wasn't even a case of it being a one-sided domestic abuse either. The dad sometimes had worse black eyes than the mom, and scratches all down his face where she'd probably close them to death. They used to knock the 7 shades out of each other, but we didn't think they were too dangerous to anyone outside their own family. Once or twice, my dad have gotten into confrontations with them about smell coming from their backyard, or the fact that they used to blast music. The dad of this insane family had threatened to kill my dad once or twice, but none of us actually thought he would go through with it, and thank God they didn't. Then for some reason, it went really quiet over there for a few weeks, and it got to the point we thought that it actually moved. Only they hadn't moved at all. They were just keeping their heads down because they straight up killed their own daughter. Apparently, she tried to run away from home and ended up in a shelter somewhere. They tracked her down, dragged her into the car one night, taking her somewhere secluded, and then beat her to death. I'm not sure they even meant to kill her. They just beat her up so bad that she ended up dying not long after that. That's why they had been so quiet. They didn't want to bring down any attention on themselves when they were dealing with disposing of her body. We had police basically camped out on our street for like weeks after they'd been arrested. All kinds of forensic vans with people in those full-bodied white fabric suits going in and out all hours of the day. They were obviously looking for traces of the girl, but whether or not they found anything, I'm not really sure. I do know it was in the paper though, and like I said, I thank God the guy never did anything to my dad, because he did actually go on to murder somebody, his own daughter at that.
Last year, after a blissful first year of living in a new apartment, all on my own for the first time, a man moved in next door that I will never forget. The layout of the apartment is crucial to understand this incident, so I made a little diagram floor plan taken from the closest thing I could find online and edited. The most important part is that my balcony and his balcony are only partially separated by a wall, and there is a solid 2-foot gap in which you can easily walk from one to the other. For context, I previously had a very lonely woman living next door for the entire first year I lived there, who never crossed this balcony threshold without being explicitly invited. I only throw this in there so you can understand I wasn't previously concerned about someone infiltrating my space. The first time I met this new neighbor, and he was unloading groceries from his massive truck into the assigned parking spot next to mine. As I was driving up, he and a girl I assumed to be his girlfriend were unloading boxes from Costco. I noticed them speaking, and as soon as I was out of the car, they went silent. I nodded to them, proceeded to the elevator, and the guy ran up behind me, threw some boxes down, and begged me to wait. No problem, I'm a good neighbor. While in the elevator, the girlfriend refuses to make eye contact or speak to me. A little weird, but I just thought she was shy. But he quickly introduced himself and was extremely chatty. In the 45 seconds it takes to get the floor where our apartments are, he asked how I liked the place, where I was from, and where I worked. Looking back, his enthusiasm was a little strange, but I chalked it up to him being excited to be in a new place. For the sake of the rest of this story, we'll call him Sam. Sam was maybe 33, 6 foot tall, with a slim, muscular build, and had hair bust extremely short, as if the mask is balding. Pretty average looking by all accounts. The first few weeks we run into each other often, and always make small talk, and always refers to me as Miss. I assume it's because he forgot my name, but wanted to be polite. I almost never see his girlfriend after the first night, but occasionally I can hear him talking to a lady in his apartment, as the walls are reasonably thin. One night, about 3 months after Sam moved in, my boyfriend is spending the nights, and we were watching movies on the couch. It's maybe 11:30 p.m. The back of the couch is against the wall I share with Sam, and we hear some banging noise. My first thought is that him and his girlfriend must be getting it on. Boyfriend and I laugh and turn the volume up a bit to drown them out. Then, in addition to the banging, the neighbors begin to scream. We can hear objects being thrown, glass shattering. The words are muffled, but there's distinctively anger and crying going on. My boyfriend, Jim that he is, steps onto the semi-shared balcony, and in his loudest voice, heels over without crossing on the seance balcony. "Everything okay in there?" The girl opens the sliding door on Sam, sight a minute or two later, and says sorry about that. So we leave it alone. I'm concerned, but we have no idea what actually happened and decide to go to bed. Big mistake, I know. I wake up around 3 a.m. to more screaming, but my boyfriend refuses to wake up, and I'm not about to take my 5-foot self to break up whatever is going on at 3 a.m. I considered calling the police, but was so drowsy, I convinced myself I dreamed it. I deeply regret that decision. The next morning, I woke up to some terrible personal news, an entirely unrelated death of a friend, and pretty much put the events of that night on the back burner. I didn't forget, but it also wasn't on my mind. Fast forward about 2 weeks. It's a warm day, and I'm outside reading a book in a robe, bra, and shorts. I'm going to chair the faces away from Sam's apartment, so I can't see his side from where I am. I'm deep in my book, when suddenly I get a tap on the shoulder. Sam is standing behind me and asked if we can talk for a second. This man has already crossed an albeit invisible line by coming on my side of the balcony, but I also can't get to my door without physically moving him aside. So I asked him what's going on. He told me it was his birthday and asked if I knew where to get some Mary Jane, because I seem like a girl who knows how to have a good time, as we live in a state where that stuff is legal. I told him that I'm sure Google would provide the best dispensary in the area, but I personally didn't have any. He proceeds to tell me how drunk he got last night, and at this point, I'm itching for an exit. As I start to move as if to signal I'm done talking, he reaches out from my shoulder and tells me he hit and scratched my car last night because he was driving very, very wasted. Remember his massive truck? He says all of this with a smile on his face, almost laughing. I'm surprised, but mostly when I get away from him because my creep senses are starting to tingle, and I don't want to blow up at him for hitting my car. He says he'll send me his insurance info if I give him my number, and thankfully, I knew that would be a bad call. I made a bad, nervous joke about knowing where he lived and said if the damage was bad enough, I would knock on his door to get his insurance. He counters by saying he will leave a note with his info on my door. He retreats from the balcony while also saying he'd prefer to just pay me cash and not involve insurance. I give it an hour or so, and then I head down to assess the damage. I did this because I didn't want to walk down at the same time as him and risk having him follow me. Sure enough, there are 2 long new scratches on the driver's door and knock deep, just kind of superficial or worthy of a call to insurance immediately. I really just didn't want to get involved with him in any way, so I decided I could deal with the scratches. But this little event has kind of shaken me. At this point, I knew something was off with him. Nothing unusual happens as far as I'm aware this night. The next day is Saturday, and as I had to work the next day, I'm home alone, watching some action, a movie, and it's around 11 p.m. I'm on the sofa with my cat curled up on me, and the movie is relatively loud, so it takes me a little while to register this banging noise coming from the hallway of my apartment building. I honestly only noticed because my cat had woken up and got all puffed up and freaked out. I turned down the volume of the film, and suddenly, the banging is getting louder and louder. And just as I stand up, I hear the 5 words no one wants to hear coming from their door. "Open up. It's the police." My stomach dropped to the floor. I had lied to Sam the day before. I totally did have some ganja on me, and I had smoked a joint outside on the balcony, the part furthest away from Sam's maybe 20 minutes before. I'm totally panicked, high as a kite, and trying to control my breathing so I don't immediately come off as suspicious before I answer the door. I remember checking the people to see a close-up of a cop's face, and then open the door, coming face to face with 6 officers, all with guns drawn. I'm about 0.5 seconds away from completely peeing my pants in fear, still convinced I'm somehow in trouble for smoking a joint. The officer who seems to be in charge can sense instantly the level of panic, and he says, "Ma'am, you're not in trouble. We need to speak with you about your neighbor. Can we come in?" At this point, I'm reeling, and my whole being is tense. I let the cops in, but my heart hasn't moved from my throat. The policeman in charge asked me about any interactions with Sam. I told them I barely know him, that he just lives next door, moved in a few months ago. I asked why they needed to be in my apartment. I'm scared, but also I don't typically get along with cops, and I have the right to know why 6 of them practically waved their guns in my face. The lead officer proceeds to tell me that Sam was a bad guy. He apparently beat his girlfriend so bad the night prior that she's now in the ICU for her injuries. They also told me Sam had a gun and had barricaded himself in the apartment next to mine. They said they had spoken to my building manager and knew my place had access to his balcony, and they needed to use it. Then they asked me to go into the bedroom and lock the doors and turn the lights off. The next 30 to 45 minutes were complete torture. In my panic, I left my cell phone on the kitchen counter and had to sit in my room, just listening to the commotion. No shots were ever fired, but there was a lot of yelling and what sounded like things being thrown. Eventually, after what felt like a lifetime, the main officer knocked on my door and told me that Sam had been arrested and thanked me for letting them use my apartment. They asked me questions for maybe 15 more minutes and left. I wish this is where the story ended. There's a bit more. In the days following Sam's arrest, I became even more panicked about him coming back to the apartment building, worried about retaliation. I hadn't said anything to the police to technically incriminate him. I had proof of nothing except his word that he was the one who scratched my car, but I did tell them about the night my boyfriend and I heard them fight. About 5 days later, Sam reappeared at the building as I was coming home from work one evening. He tried to approach me, but the elevator shut just as he was running to catch it. My whole body got tense, like the feeling when you come this close to getting in a car accident but narrowly avoid it. I stayed off my balcony entirely from this point, and always kept the curtains closed. We didn't speak, or rarely see each other at all for another few weeks, and then had our final interaction. Sam stopped me in the parking lot one night, running after me as I was about to get on the elevator. He begged me to tell him why I let the cops in that night. I told him the honest truth, but I was stoned, didn't know what to do, and had a bad history with cops. This is all true, and again, I was concerned about him trying to retaliate. He then got pretty upset and kept trying to repeat the question, obviously wanting a different answer. When I couldn't give him one, he then offered me $3,000 to testify as a character witness on his behalf. Because I knew him and knew how he really treated women, I was speechless and very freaked out. He told me his hearing was the next Thursday morning, and he asked if I could show up. I was like a deer frozen in headlights for a moment, and then somehow got out of there after mumbling a string of words that were most likely incoherent. The Wednesday night before his trial, I came home from work and my cat was acting kind of weird, like something had just booked her, and her tail was all puffed out. I kinda shook it off, but I noticed through the curtains that there was something taped to the outside of my sliding glass door. Apparently, Sam had left a post-it with his phone number and name, and underneath, "I'm counting on you." Needless to say, I never showed up. I took a photo of the post, had grabbed my cat, locked all of my doors, and stayed at my mom's house for about 5 days after that happened. I did phone the police to let them know he had been on my balcony again, but they never followed up with anything. Eventually, my boyfriend came and went back to my place together. Everything was as it should have been. I never saw Sam again. But a few weeks later, a lady that I'd never seen before was cleaning out his apartment. Maybe a month after that, new people moved in, and things have been normal ever since. I tried calling the police in the county jail to see if he was in lockup again, but no one was able to release information to me. I'm hoping that means he's there, if he did what the police said he did. So to Sam, I will say I'm not really sure what happened, but my biggest regret is not calling the police when I felt like I should have. And my gut and I hope to God I never see you when you get out.